today, when lawmakers will consider extending certain trade preferences, with a vote on that measure scheduled for 5:30. It's the first step Congress needs to take to eventually consider trade agreements for 3 countries. You're watching the Senate live right here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. O God, our defender, we call to you in prayer. Our nation cannot prosper without your watch care and your gracious providence. For your loving kindness and tender mercies, we praise your name. As our senators grapple with the complex challenges of our time, be for them a shepherd who leads and guides. Lead them to live with a generous spirit that comes from a confidence in your abiding presence. May they walk in the path of gratitude, meditating on your words and glorifying your name. Thank you for being our refuge and defense. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., September 19, 2011, to the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business. Senators during that period of time will be allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each. Following morning business, Senate will resume consideration of H.R. 2832, which is the Trade Adjustment Assistance legislation as tied in with the GSP bill. At 5:30, there will be a cloture vote on the motion to proceed to H.R. 2832. We hope to get consent to begin consideration of the bill after the vote. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that morning business be extended until 5 p.m. today so that senators can speak regarding the tributes they wish to make to former Senator Charles Percy of Illinois.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I am told that we would like to end morning business at 4:45, so I ask consent that morning business expire at that time.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I was saddened to hear the terrible accident on Friday at the Reno Air Show, which killed 10 people and injured many more. We just received word an hour or two ago that another person had died in the hospital. My heart goes out to those who were hurt, and my thoughts are with the families of those who lost their lives, including the pilot of the World War II era plane that crashed into the spectators. I commend the many responders who rushed to the scene Friday. Their quick thinking and skillful assistance saved lives. Well, this crash was devastating, and it was. It's fortunate, and I'm glad the pilot took quick action to prevent additional loss of life by avoiding a grandstand packed with thousands of spectators. My 4 grandchildren and my son attended the show on Thursday. My oldest grandson, Mitchell, was at the event with his scout troop earlier on Friday, just a few hours before this terrible accident. Although officials are still investigating the crash, initial reports indicate that a piece of the plane's tail broke off prior to the incident and the accident. I hope that this terrible event, the first of its kind in this nation, will not deter people from attending air shows in the future. Thousands of people enjoy these shows every year. The late Senator Ted Stevens attended this show many times and told me that it's the best of its kind. It was the best of its kind. I'll continue to monitor the investigation, of course. Mr. President, this weekend, Senator Charles Percy of Illinois, the progressive Republican and father-in-law to our own Senator Jay Rockefeller, died at age 91. He's been failing for some time, and I maintained contact with Senator Rockefeller about his wife's father. I didn't know Senator Percy, only by reputation. But I do know that he was an independent thinker and a moderate who always put his country before party. The Senate could use more of his brand of pragmatism today. Senator Percy was a proponent of tougher environmental regulations and consumer protections, an outspoken opponent of the Vietnam War and a proponent of nuclear non-proliferation. He was also a Navy veteran and a businessman who was often mentioned as a presidential contender. This body, the Senate, honors him for his faithful service to his country as a sailor and as a member of Congress. My thoughts are with his family, including Senator Rockefeller and his lovely wife, Sharon. Mr. President, today President Obama laid out a common-sense plan to substantially reduce the budget deficit. I congratulate President Obama for his vision. Last week, he presented the country with a roadmap to reduce our jobs deficit, a proposal to create nearly 2 million jobs and reduce unemployment by a percentage point. Today, he has also offered a pathway to reduce our budget deficit, not only our jobs deficit, but a budget deficit. It's a concrete strategy to cut the deficit by more than $4 trillion over the next decade and to do it fairly. Instead, his plan calls for shared sacrifice for all Americans, including those who can best afford to help. It calls on those who have benefited from the tax policies that sunk this country deeper and deeper and deeper into debt to help get us out of this debt. Americans know shared sacrifice is the best path to fiscal sustainability. All the polls indicate that. Republicans believe that. Democrats believe that. Independents believe that. They believe that many of the richest few should pay more. And one of the richest of all, Warren Buffett, agrees. That's why the President has proposed the so-called Buffett rule, that no American making more than $1 million a year should pay a lower tax than this nation's middle class. This rule would apply to the top 0.3%. That's all, Mr. President, a small group of Americans. But they're the richest of the rich, just like Mr. Buffett. Warren Buffett believes it's unfair that he pays a lower income tax than his secretary. This is what he said, quote, "If you're in the luckiest 1% of humanity, you owe it to the rest of humanity to think about the other 99%. Well, actually, Mr. President, it's more than 99%. It's 99.7%. There are about 22,000 people in this country who make more than $1 million a year. This is net income, yet pay less than 15% of their income in taxes. The top 400 earners in this country, all of whom make more than $110 million a year, pay a small percentage of their income in taxes. They pay a smaller share than plumbers and teachers and factory workers. More than anyone else, these millionaires and billionaires benefited from Bush tax cuts that contributed $3 trillion to our deficit. They helped plunge this nation into a financial hole. Yet congressional Republicans believe middle-class families and seniors, not the millionaires and billionaires who've enjoyed trillions in tax breaks, should bear the burden of getting us out of that hole. A balanced approach to reducing our deficit means that those who have benefited the most from policies that created our deficit should also help solve our deficit, the crisis that we have. A balanced approach means everyone pays his or her fair share. It means the middle class, seniors, and those who can least afford it will not bear the heaviest burden. So I commend President Obama for insisting on basic fairness as we address our deficit problem. Last week was a productive one here in the Senate. We reached a bipartisan agreement to pass emergency aid for communities affected by devastating floods, tornadoes, and wildfires. We also reauthorized the Federal Aviation Administration, keeping 80,000 safety inspectors and construction workers on the job. And we passed a highway bill that will keep 1.8 million people at work building bridges and highways. Congress has no duty more pressing than putting Americans back to work, and this highway legislation will do just that. But we can and must do more to ease the unemployment crisis in this country. That's why this week the Senate will take up the Trade Adjustment Assistance legislation. The TAA, or the Trade Adjustment Assistance legislation, helps U.S. workers who lose their jobs because of international trade to learn new skills so they can re-enter a changing workforce. And it helps them pay for health insurance while they're training for these new jobs. A global economy means fierce global competition. Unless our workforce is flexible and well-trained, we cannot hope to compete. Between 2001 and 2008, Americans lost 2.4 million jobs because of trade with China. Trade Adjustment Assistance Program is retraining many of these people, getting them back to work, and boosting our economy at the same time. It's unfortunate my Republican colleagues who say they care so much about free trade have prevented 3 such agreements from moving forward because of objections to this Trade Adjustment Assistance legislation. We've known for a long time, Mr. President, that we're going to move to this Trade Adjustment Assistance. It's unthinkable that the Republicans would stop us from doing that, and that's just what has happened. As we struggle to rebound from the worst recession in generations, it's unthinkable that we would abandon hardworking Americans who lost their jobs through no fault of their own. The Trade Adjustment Assistance legislation provides the lifeline they need to get back on their feet. Mr. President, would the Chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 4:45, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
I would note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
While the Senate is in a quorum call, I'll let you know that they'll be considering the GSP bill today. That's H.R. 2832, the Generalized System of Preferences bill. It gives preference to 129 developing countries in trade with the United States. Majority Leader Reid also announced senators will be taking time to remember former Senator Charles Percy, who died this weekend. He represented Illinois in the Senate for almost 20 years. He was a chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee and a critic of the Vietnam War. Senator Percy was 91 years old. While the Senate takes up the GSP bill, President Obama will be preparing to head to New York City tomorrow to speak at the UN General Assembly and to discuss the Transitional National Council of Libya and meet with Afghan President Hamid Karzai. On Wednesday, the president will address the UN General Assembly, where he's expected to talk about the role of American foreign policy, Libya, Syria, and Middle East peace. You're watching live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
For up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the decade that has passed since the devastating attacks of 9/11, we have seen enormous changes in our daily lives. For many of us, these changes have become routine. We have become more alert of potential suspicious activities, accustomed to additional screening procedures at airports, and understanding of additional security precautions in places that could be seen as potential targets for terrorists. For many other Americans, though, their lives were altered in ways that are anything but routine. These are the families, friends, and brothers in arms of those who have given their lives in the global war on terror, including the over 3,000 lives taken in the horrific attacks on our nation on September 11, 2001. This past Sunday was a somber day to reflect, remember, and honor those lives that have been cut short by terror. On Sunday morning, I spoke at my church about the impact 9/11 had on me personally and us collectively as a nation. It is important to take the time here on the U.S. Senate chamber to remember these brave heroes. We all remember where we were at the time the plane struck the towers and the awful feeling when we realized that this wasn't an accident. We remember the emotional outpouring of our nation, shared, and how the tragedy brought us all closer together. What happened after the moments of devastation on September 11, 2001 unified our nation and demonstrated the perseverance and the will of the American people. We remember the people who refused to leave an injured coworker and those who led others to safety. We remember the firefighters, the policemen, and all of the first responders who saved lives that day. Many gave their lives in doing so. And we remember the heroes at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the brave passengers of Flight 93. We also remember all the brave servicemen and women who fought and continue to fight to keep us free. They do so by choice. They do so out of love of country, and they do so to protect our nation, our freedom, and our values. Since the 9/11 attacks, thousands of Arkansans have been deployed to far regions of the globe to fight terrorism. The Arkansas National Guard, which has historically been a reserve unit, has taken on a more active duty role in the war on terror. Units from the Arkansas National Guard have played a vital role on the war on terror, with deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, and some units having served multiple tours on the battlefront. America's military personnel and the veterans of the global war on terror can be proud of all that they have accomplished. Their continued efforts brought Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind these attacks, to justice, along with a number of his top lieutenants and numerous Taliban commanders. They continue to battle bin Laden's fanatical followers and protect us from those who remain committed to inflicting harm on the United States. Many of the veterans from the global war on terror have returned home with permanent life-altering injuries. We have worked hard here in this body and in the House to ensure that they and all the veterans of this war receive all the care and benefits they have earned and deserve upon their return. We must continue to uphold our promise to our veterans. We must also continue to ensure that our military personnel on the battlefield have everything that they need to successfully accomplish the mission and to return home safely. According to the U.S. Central Command, more than 6,200 service members have made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. Each one is a portrait of bravery. Navy Corpsman Michael Van Johnson, Jr., a native of Little Rock, was the first Arkansan killed in the battlefield in the global war on terror. He was killed while selflessly tending to wounded colleagues in Iraq. Since his death, another 101 Arkansans have given their lives for our country in the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. This year alone, we have lost 5 service members from Arkansas. At the beginning of the year, Sergeant Ethan C. Harden was killed in action in Lagar province of Afghanistan. He was killed when insurgents attacked his unit with an improvised explosive device. Sergeant Harden was 25 at the time of his death. Sergeant Harden grew up in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and was remembered by his high school principal as a young man with a pleasant, likable, gentle personality. His pastor echoed those thoughts, calling Sergeant Harden a warrior who was motivated to take up arms for his country, not out of any particular hostilities towards the enemy, but rather out of a strong desire to keep our country safe. Last week, after the death of Sergeant Hardin, Sergeant Zaina C. Kramer was killed in Kandahar province of Afghanistan when the insurgents attacked her unit with an IED. Sergeant Kramer was born in Texarkana, Texas, and graduated from Arkansas High School in Texarkana, Arkansas. She was 28 at the time of her death. Sergeant Kramer, friends and family say they will remember her lovely singing voice and her love of country, friends, family, and fellow soldiers, including her canine partner, Jaffa. A soldier for more than 6 years, Sergeant Kramer was assigned to the 212th Military Police Detachment as an Army dog handler. She and her canine partner were assigned to check vehicles and facilities for explosives and were carrying out a routine clearance mission when the blast occurred. In March, another IED attack in the Kandahar province once again impacted Arkansas. Army Corporal Lauren M. Buffalo of Mountain Pine, Arkansas, was only 20 years old when insurgents took his life. Corporal Buffalo was carrying on the family tradition of military service. His father and his uncle served in the Army, and his great-grandfather was a B-17 bomber pilot during World War II. His father says Corporal Buffalo was a dedicated military man who loved music, liked to hunt, and ride horses. Last month, 2 Arkansans were among the 30 U.S. service members killed when their Chinook helicopter was shot down in the Wardak province of Afghanistan. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack, which resulted in one of the greatest losses of U.S. military lives in a single incident in the decade-long war in Afghanistan. Most of those killed in the attack were U.S. Special Forces personnel. Navy Special Warfare Operator Senior Petty Officer Thomas A. Ratzliff of Green Forest, Arkansas, was one of those Special Forces officers killed in the attack. Senior Chief Ratzliff graduated from Green Forest High School in 1995 and immediately enlisted in the Navy to begin the process of achieving his lifelong dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. According to the Green Forest Mayor Charlie Reese, Senior Chief Ratzliff developed a reputation as one of the most highly decorated officers in this elite unit, but humbly remained grounded. The mayor called him a high-class young man. Senior Chief Ratzliff was 34 at the time of his death. Air Force Tech Sergeant John W. Brown of Siloam Springs, Arkansas, was also killed in that attack. An accomplished athlete in his youth, Sergeant Brown played football and basketball. He went to John Brown University on a swimming scholarship. In Siloam Springs, he was known for his positive attitude, his intelligence, and his sense of humor. After seeing a video of Special Operations Unit, he abandoned plans to become a nurse anesthetist and enlisted in the Air Force to become a medic, where he was assigned to the elite 24th Special Tactics Squadron at Pope Field, North Carolina. Sergeant Brown was 33 at the time of his death. This is something that we need to remember, not just on anniversary dates, but at all times. It should serve as the ultimate reminder that we in this chamber have an obligation to come together and to make this country a better place. I ask my colleagues in the Senate to join me in honoring their lives and their legacy, as well as the sacrifice of all that have fought and died in Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Operation New Dawn. Let us never forget their sacrifices, and let their legacies be an inspiration for every American. Mr. President, I yield back and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. The Senator from Michigan.
Before the clerk calls the roll, has the clerk begun the call? Mr. President, are we in morning business now?
We are.
Mr. President, I want today to discuss 2 more ways to reduce the budget deficit by eliminating tax loopholes and special tax breaks and restoring fairness to the tax code while protecting essential programs for American families. Last week I sent a letter to members of the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction outlining a 7-point plan that could lower the deficit by $1 trillion over 10 years through some restored revenues. I spoke last week here on the floor about the necessity of addressing revenues, not just spending cuts, to achieve real deficit reduction. And I discussed in some detail two of the proposals in my plan: combating offshore tax haven abuse and eliminating the tax loophole that forces taxpayers to subsidize stock option compensation for corporate executives. Since I spoke last week here on the floor, President Obama has outlined his ideas for deficit reduction. Significantly, the President has embraced the need to restore significant revenues to reduce the deficit. I believe the President's proposals are an important step towards serious deficit reduction. Some of his ideas indeed parallel the proposals which I've made to the Joint Select Committee. Now, today I want to outline and describe two more of my proposals, each dealing with a tax loophole that benefits Wall Street at the expense of working families and our fiscal well-being. One would end the carried interest loophole that allows hedge fund managers to pay the lower capital gains tax rate on their pay for managing investments. The second would end the blended rate loophole that gives preferential status to income from derivatives trading, even in the case of derivatives which are just held for seconds or moments or minutes. That preferred status is given over the kinds of long-term investments that are more important in helping put capital to work, growing the economy and creating jobs. Now, each of these two loopholes amounts to a subsidy. Working American families who pay their taxes every year end up carrying an extra burden because these provisions allow Wall Street to pay a lower tax rate than the rate applied to average workers. I cannot see how anybody can explain to working Americans that they must bear a greater tax burden so that hedge fund managers get a tax break on pay that often amounts to millions of dollars a year, or so that speculative traders can pay a lower tax rate on so-called investments that they might hold for just a few seconds. Now, first, let's talk about the carried interest loophole. Hedge fund managers generally make their money by charging their clients two fees. First, the manager gets a management fee, typically 2% of the assets. Second, the manager typically gets 20% of the profits from those investments above a certain level. That 20% is known as carried interest, and under current law, hedge fund managers can treat that income as a long-term capital gain taxed at a maximum rate of 15% and not at the higher ordinary income rates. Now, what is the blended rate loophole? Since 1981, those who trade in some financial products, such as futures contracts and options, have enjoyed a specially created tax loophole that allows them to pay a lower rate than, for example, traders who buy and sell stock. No matter how long a speculator holds on to a futures or options contract, again, even if it's a few seconds, their gains and losses are taxed at a lower so-called blended rate. That is, part at the capital gains rate, part as ordinary income. So a dealer who buys a stock and sells it within a year must pay taxes at the ordinary income rate, while that same dealer who buys an option and sells it 30 seconds later gets to pay the lower capital gains rate on most of that income. These special tax breaks impose an unfair burden on American taxpayers, and they contribute significantly to the budget deficit. Based on estimates from the Joint Committee on Taxation, eliminating the carried interest loophole could reduce the deficit by $20 billion or more over 10 years. That Joint Committee has made no estimates of the cost to the Treasury of the blended rate loophole, but it's reasonable to assume that ending it would reduce the deficit by billions of dollars. But beyond their fiscal impact, these proposals would help restore fairness to the tax code. These tax subsidies give preference to activities that do not contribute much to economic growth or job creation, the way other activities that don't enjoy the same subsidies do. Instead, they subsidize hedge fund managers and derivative dealers. Now take the carried interest loophole again for a minute. We tax income that investors receive from hedge funds and other investments at the lower capital gains rate because, in theory at least, those investments help put capital to work, creating jobs and growing the economy. But the fund manager, the hedge fund manager, isn't putting his own capital at risk. He's just doing his job, the same as his employees, or the janitor who cleans his office at night. This tax break doesn't reward risk-taking or job creation. It rewards what is already an extremely lucrative profession. According to a survey by a magazine covering the hedge fund industry, the top 10 hedge fund managers last year each made at least $440 million. 6 made more than $1 billion in 1 year. Now, it's hard to imagine that we need to offer a tax break to encourage people to become hedge fund managers. Similarly, the derivatives blended rate loophole doesn't just add to the deficit, it's plainly unfair. It's unfair not only to working Americans who have to pay higher tax rates than these derivative traders, it's also unfair to investors who risk their capital in long-term stock and other investments that are more important to job creation, but don't enjoy that same tax break. This loophole gives preferential treatment to short-term speculative trades over long-term patient capital. And that's exactly the wrong message to send. So, Mr. President, we should end these Wall Street loopholes. I've encouraged the members of the Joint Select Committee to end them. We should end them because they add to the deficit, because they subsidize activity that does not need a subsidy and that does not add much to economic growth, and because they're unfair to the millions of American taxpayers who do not enjoy the same tax breaks and have to pay more in taxes to make up for these unfair subsidies. Eliminating them would be good for our economy. It would be able to reduce the deficit by billions of dollars a year. It would help to fund important programs that protect seniors and children, programs that make our nation stronger. So I hope that the Joint Select Committee will look hard at these and other proposals in my plan as they carry out their difficult task. And I'll be back again in the next few days to discuss 3 more ideas that can reduce the deficit, protect the middle class, and avoid draconian cuts in vital programs. Thank the presiding officer. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.